All right, man. Well, welcome. Thank you for doing this. Remind me how to say your name again.
Quetzal.
Quetzal, Wild Quetzal. This is a real honor to have you on here, man. Why don't you give us a little bit of a background on who you are and kind of a lot of the things you're talking about online?
Yeah, thank you for having me. A lot of my work is largely based around reconnecting people to nature and the nature of themselves. That manifests itself in many different forms. But my journey has basically brought me to an understanding of this divine, sacred exchange that we have and share with the ecology, and restoring that within ourselves and within the larger community of people. So it has manifested itself primarily. I think a big part of it has been through food, as a mechanism for awakening, and it just realizing that the way we've conventionally been raised, like us meaning people who come from civilization, because if you go to traditional cultures, they don't have the issues and perceptions that we have, so they're not struggling with trying to understand food from our perspective. But for us, folks coming from civilization, we're having to completely dismantle our reality just to get a grasp on what the heck is going on, what the heck is food, what is this, were we born into with this machine. And so that's my work in large part, is just reconnecting people, and like I like to say, reminding people of who they've always been. As humanity, we all share across all cultures. There's a lot of similarities and a lot of similar things. Cultures may manifest it in different ways, but the essence of who we are as people, as humans, is integrated with the land.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, we are really inspired by your Instagram page, and we want to honor the fact that you're willing to put yourself out there on social media, because that's a really challenging place to have your work be vulnerable in the way that you're being, talking about these really important topics. And oftentimes these are kind of controversial topics, because a lot of what you're posting about is like death and the mechanistic way that people are perceiving food systems and perceiving themselves within the world, and how we're so separate from our ecologies. And I guess I just wanted to sort of begin by asking, what was there a moment for you that made you realize, like, oh my God, people need to have access to this information and access to this knowledge that you're so willingly giving through social media? Yeah,
so a large part of my journey, like when I began my journey, I was actually vegan, and I was raw vegan, and that's how I kind of came into changing my food. And for me, I look at it like it was a stage of cleansing and just detaching from most everything to kind of reapproach it in a new way, and to see it from a different perspective. So I think what struck me was this idea of sovereignty, and realizing that a lot of these food systems, even the ones that I was embracing at that time, were dependent and directly correlated with this civilization, with this way of life that was dependent on outside sources to feed itself, So I started realizing that the quickest route to sovereignty, as far as from a food perspective, is to include all kingdoms of life, and to have a place for all that, just as traditional people have had it. They tapped into every kingdom of life as a food source, because that's what was available in the ecology, and that's what allowed them to be sovereign and allowed them to not have to depend on the world that we depend on, which is like the grocery store in the civilized world. So that was like the key point for me, because I heard a lot of people talking about sovereignty, but to understand like sovereignty, you have to really go into the food, because that's what sustains a people, and so food has always been closely linked with cultures, because the food that the culture consumes is a large part of what gives it its identity. So, through learning that and realizing that if we don't have this sacred connection with the food, then our sovereignty is non-existent. We're just kind of, like I said, shopping from a different aisle in the grocery store, but never really truly getting to the source of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of takes us right before we record, and we were talking about this concept of, and again, this is something you broke down so great on your Instagram, was the difference between, saying, oh, paleo diet, vegan diets, carnivore diets, all these various diets are really just civilized diets. It's a different version of civilized diets, and as you say, shopping from a different aisle as compared to a Lifeway. What does a Lifeway mean to you, and how is that? How are you explaining that concept to people?
Right. Yeah. So Lifeway is actually like an anthropological term when they study like different cultures and tribes. Like this is a term that they use to describe a way of life that these people had. So when it comes to food, like that is just a way of life. It wasn't something that was formulated or fabricated as a marketing ploy or you know, to sell a certain product. Like if you look at a lot of the market, they're going to traditional cultures who have consumed maybe say like you go to South America and you find the acai berry and you see, oh, well, it has a high antioxidant potential. So then you take that back to people in North America who've never heard of acai berry and you market it to them as this new superfood. But to the traditional people in that region, that's just a regular food. That's just what they've been eating all this time, you know. So you see a lot of that to where we call them diets, and it has the word die in it. And that's what I was kind of emphasizing, that we're unconsciously kind of perpetuating death in the guise of health, you know. But traditional people, it's a life way. This is what gives us life, and this is part of our life, and this is how it manifests as a relationship directly with our food that goes deeper than just energy. You know, just this like you were saying, this mechanistic way of like, well, I'm just putting fuel in my body. Like, no, it's a much more sacred relationship because you're interacting with another organism. A lot of traditional people do view other organisms as relatives, as their own non-person entities that aren't human entities, but they're their own people in a sense. You know, they're their own organism, and so they have that reverence because, for one, their existence is intertwined with them. You know, and also like other organisms have purpose outside of what we want for them too, you know. So it's like there's that sacredness in all of that. So yeah, definitely. I think that the modern approach is highly detached from the ecology and highly detached from the true relationship, which is the cultivation of all the different parts of that plant and all the different stages and cycles of that plant. Like, we only see the end product, and we have a relationship with the end product, and that's why we treat it like a commodity, because it's just food. It's just the only thing we see is the end result that we put into our body. But if we had a deeper relationship, we would know what the flower looks like, what the stalk looks like, what the roots look like, what the different seasons and cycles of that organism looks like, and we would, you know, cherish it that much more because we would understand truly what it took to produce it, not just, you know, money wise and what we exchange in the store, but what it energetically, what it was required for it to come to our plate.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You had a post recently that was, I think, you know the mango, but you don't know the tree, you know, and how even that level of disconnect can have a really impactful, energetic, how do I want to say this? Like, it devalues the food that we're consuming if we don't have that relationship. And something that we came to, because Jake had a vegan experience as well that kind of led him down this path. I never was vegan, but we realized as we began this project that death of animals is also something that is like so intrinsically important when you're becoming part of an ecology, and how so many people are so separated from the death that's required for them to live. And I feel like that also is such a severance of what makes food sacred, is that you're being given someone else's life so that you can live, and should be like an experience of reciprocity, of relationship, of, you know, gratitude. And we are so separated from that in civilization. And so I'd love to hear like your take on that. And, you know, was that a part of why you were vegan, is because of how uncomfortable death is, or because of how separate you were from it? Like, I would just love to know your thought process around all of that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so for me, veganism, and if you ask some people, they might tell you that I wasn't vegan because my approach to it wasn't from the ethical standpoint, which is largely what veganism is based around. It was more around the health aspect of it, and me believing that this eating this way was healthier for me, you know. But I just started to learn a lot of information and started to tap into information of people who were actually having experiences on the ecology, and then learning about traditional life ways, and they just didn't correlate with veganism was teaching, and even plant-based ways of eating were teaching. Yeah, I was seeing people trying to fit this narrative and, basically superimpose it onto traditional life ways. And I was like, no, that's not right. Like, we can say that this way of eating, you have every right to practice it. Like, I'm not trying to stop you, but to go back and say, well, traditional people were plant-based actually, like, I just had to say something about that, because that's not right. Because now we're trying to rewrite history in traditional people's life ways to fit our own worldview, because we believe that it's morally, ethically, or more sustainable, and we can argue the merits of that. But we just have to understand that this is a new way of being, and this is a new life, just a lifestyle. This is not something that has been traditionally practiced by traditional people, because it wasn't possible before. Like, what makes veganism and these kinds of restrictive diets possible is civilization. You need to concentrate resources and have a way to be able to store them and produce them year round to be able to maintain these types of diets. And so me realizing that, like, I had to ask myself at some point, am I trying to be in tune with civilization in the grocery store, or am I truly wanting to connect with nature? And what the hell does that look like? And am I willing to go there no matter what that looks like? And so a lot of people aren't. And I don't think a lot of people have asked themselves that question. Like, if you go into nature and you figure out that you have to kill an animal for your food, are you still willing to do that and be in tune with nature, or will you revert back to your comfort and go to the grocery store and maintain the diet that feels comfortable for you? Now, that's not from a judgmental standpoint, but I think we do have to ask ourselves that question, And for me, I'm going the former route, where I want to connect with nature, and I want to do what I see is in alignment with nature, regardless of what that looks like. And I know and I understand that there's some things that are going to be uncomfortable merely because we're not used to them, merely because we weren't brought up in the presence of those practices of animals being killed, of animals being, taken apart. And when I said that about the fruit, the fruit, but you don't know the tree, I was also talking about the animal. Like, you eat the animal, but you don't know the anatomy of it. You don't know its reproductive cycle. So it's like, it's not just to bash one side. It's like, we all need to be aware of everything. So in the plant-based community, you can eat as much plants as you want, and it doesn't matter if you never have reverence for them. It doesn't matter if you know about them or how they grow or where they grow or who grew them. Just because it's plants, there's this idea that it's all good. And I just don't believe that. I don't buy that, because you don't have a connection to the food that you're eating, regardless of the animal kingdom or the plant kingdom that it comes from. That's irrelevant, because who are we to organize in a hierarchy life, especially when we're basing the characteristics on what's important based on how it's similar to us. So the closer an organism relates to a human, the more importance that we give it. The less importance that we give it. This idea of sentience is based on human characteristic. We didn't take, why didn't we prioritize photosynthesizing? Well, because we don't photosynthesize. We have sentience, and because we have sentience, we obviously empathize with other organisms that have sentience, and so we want to preserve their existence over other organisms, right? So I just started to see all this inconsistencies in my reality, especially when it pertains to nature. I think that a lot of the path of veganism and plant-based diets, a lot of times they do try to showcase it in a way where it's like, this is natural. This is going towards nature. And so that's when I come in and they're like, hold on a minute. Like, I don't want to bash what you're doing, but we have to make a distinction between what's natural and what's newly emerging in this era of civilization that we've been born into. Like, we have to make that distinction, because we need to have a starting point that is grounded in reality, in history, in human biology and evolution, that we can start from. And then whatever you want to do with that, fine. If you believe that veganism is the new route forward, go on. You're free to express that. But to go back and, try to rewrite history or try to change things, to fit the narrative, like, I don't agree with that. And that's why I speak out on many ways in that topic.
Well, thank you for speaking out, too. I mean, I went on as Maren was saying, for a number of years, I was plant-based, and then I ended up living in a vegan community. And, the way I describe it is that my intentions were, human health, planetary health, animal ethics in a sense of spirituality, a connectedness, right? And those are still in my intentions for food. Those are still in my intentions with my life, really. So I still like to honor those intentions that a lot of people have for veganism. But like you said, once I began to really, truly, honestly implore a lot of these ideals and bounce them off of history and bounce them off of the web of life and all these things, it became very hard for me to justify it. And then also including, like, when I did eat meat again, I felt great, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, but I still have such a hard time communicating this to vegans, and we get so much pushback from vegans when we release a podcast or we're on social media. Do you get a lot of pushback from vegans?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like they came for me, and I get it. And the way I look at it is like, whenever you put a lot of energy out into the world, you get it back. So I think that the reason veganism gets challenged is because a lot of times the way it's put out there is from a very a higher moral ground. So obviously they get people who are going to reciprocate that energy, and you know, you might categorize me as one of the groups that's reciprocating that energy, but it's more challenging the thought and in a balanced way, because I'm not coming out here and attacking them plainly, but I do take a firm stance in certain situations. But there's always I'm always open to discussion, like civil discussion, where we can have a conversation just like we're having. Oftentimes there's so much emotion packed in that never manifests itself. With most people, they can't just get on camera and have a conversation with somebody who might have views that are different than them, you know. But sometimes I do find somebody who has a different view, and we can talk about it, and we just share our perspectives, not to like counter one another, but just to get insight into like, oh, okay, that's interesting that you see it that way. Here's how I see it. But one of the biggest videos that kind of went viral was like last year. I did a video called "Veganism is a Byproduct of Colonization," and that really, you know, sparked the internet, and really a lot of people came and attacked me, and they basically try to dig up anything they could find on me to destroy my character because they didn't like the message, you know. And so that's an unfortunate byproduct of this new world, because I talk about the three worlds: the natural world, the civilized world, and the internet world. And in the internet world, I made a post today, the dominant aggression is like a reputation destruction. So it's like, because, you know, you can't punch somebody through a screen, or you can't be physically aggressive. So you have to resort to forms of aggression that are non-physical. And so here it's like a lot of people take that route where they want to destroy your reputation, your character. And so a lot of people did take that route, you know, but I still keep going. Like I didn't let that stop me, because I know things blow over. The internet, you know how the internet is. Like one thing is for a week or a couple of days, and then people forget about it. It just moves so fast, you know, so you can't really let that stop you. But I have got a lot of pushback, and I just try to leverage that into greater understanding. So like the things that they do bring up, I do my best to try to really consider it and really see if I can give greater insight into that point, because they might not be looking at it as deep or as from the angle that I'm looking at it. So it's a teaching opportunity. So a lot of people, like I make videos where I reply to people who are maybe being aggressive towards me, or just, you know, being plain disrespectful. And I don't do that to like amplify that energy, but I use it as a teaching moment, because I think that can be leveraged to teach a message when somebody says something and then you come back and actually correct it with from a balanced place, not just going back and forth in a drama type of fashion, but to educate people and to show them, like, and that's the thing about having a greater understanding, is that you have to execute that understanding, you know. So if somebody's being disrespectful and you have a greater understanding than them on the topic, you have to show more understanding with your response, you know. And that's the challenge, you know, because we want to get on their level, and we want to go back and forth and get off. But if you have greater understanding, then you have to be more poised with your response. And that, in effect, is more effective than going back and forth in that non-conducive manner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I just want to say, kind of on that line, I mean, not only is your page providing this sort of like really beautiful conversation, that the way that we see it is like we're having a lot of the conversations that you're having publicly on your social media. just with each other, and we realize like this whole topic, like, good God, it's everything, right? It's a lifelong conversation that we're trying to have, and we're trying to make sense of. And you try to distill it down into something that is like accessible for people. But I just, one of the things that I'm just really happy that you're doing is you're making this information accessible for people in a way that other people, I think, aren't. You know, there's a lot of people who have like a small holding or something, and they're just kind of isolated, and they're not really like going out of their way to make that information available to other people or share their wisdom, share the knowledge that they have acquired. And I'm just grateful that you are like, I mean, did you go to school or something to become a graphic designer, or what is your story with that? Because your graphics are amazing. Like, they're so on point. They make it so clear in ways that, I don't know. I'm just curious about all of that as well.
Oh yeah, that's just something, that's what I kind of grew up in, a skill. Like, growing up, I was just on the computer and I just downloaded every software I could and figured out how to use it. But now what I offer with that, as well as doing it for myself, but I offer like conscious companies services where I do branding, digital marketing, and web design. You know, I work with conscious companies, people who just have a similar message to share. So, you know, that's one of the ways that I support myself. But yeah, I just think that we have to find ways to leverage like the appeal of graphics and video and production value to share this message. Because to be honest, that's what was used to perpetuate a lot of narratives that a lot of people hold today. Like, the reason, like, for instance, the vegan movement became so big was because of production value in documentaries and films that really touched people's hearts, that really made people want to make a change, you know. And I think that energy and that intention is powerful, and it just happens that it was steered in that direction, but it can be, that same energy can be steered in another direction. We just have to figure out how to articulate and tell these stories and share this knowledge. You know, it's all about how you do it that really makes people want to listen. You know, yeah. I think we've heard enough about people coming with their aggressive energy, trying to push something. So it's like, I'm always trying to find balance in between everything. So if I see a world to the left and everybody's to the right, like, and everybody's on the polarities, I try to bridge the gap and find something in the middle that we can both find like consensus on. So that's been a lot of my approach. I don't demonize technology, but while it's here and while we have it, I try to use it to the best of my ability to share a message that I believe is valuable and that people can get value from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about that a lot too, where it's like, I feel conflicted, but at the same time, you know, these are the mediums that the culture at large uses. This is the medium at large that the culture understands and does educate itself. So if you're going to change the culture, you got to use the languages the culture is using, you know, and so exactly. That's what we're doing. So, and you're doing it so well. Were you always interested in food, you know, as a kid, when you were younger? Like, what started what led the path to even be vegan for you, you know?
Right. Yeah. No, I think I was highly asleep for most of my life. Like, I was not thinking about any of the things that I think about today, which is weird to think about because that's all I think about now, you know. But before I was just going along with things. I didn't really know who I was. I didn't have an identity for myself and didn't have a purpose. But the thing that kind of sparked this, well, I would say, like, now that looking back, there was always little hints. But a big one that I didn't know I was coming awake to, but I was at the time, now looking back, was that movie Into the Wild. Did you ever watch that movie? That movie. Yeah. I was young at that time, but I was ready to go. Like, I was like ready to pack up my stuff and go into nature, you know. And so now looking back, I can trace that and be like, well, I always had this allure to nature. I just didn't recognize it. I just didn't know what it was. But I knew when I heard certain callings, even the book, The Call of the Wild, I remember reading it back in, you know, grade school. And that was one of the few books that I do remember. So it's certain things like that made me realize, like, I always been who I was, but it just was not on the surface being expressed. But as far as the food aspect, it was my brother that kind of got me into it. My mom, I hadn't seen my brother in a long time, and she kind of told me, oh, your brother's really changed. Like, he's really become a different person. And so I was kind of scared to hear that, because I was like, what do you mean? Is he like losing his mind? Is like, I didn't realize that people could change, and that there was this concept of like evolving and growing and actually embracing principles that could change your life. So when I finally talked to him, we spent like the whole day talking. We were at my niece's birthday party, and we just ended up talking. Like, we didn't even eat or talk to anybody else. He was just telling me the whole time, like, we're not supposed to be eating this way. Look at the food. And at that time, like I said, it was raw veganism. So I went from standard American diet. I was working out at the time and eating what I would at that time maybe say healthy, or just watching, macronutrients and stuff like that. But I went from that to just a strict raw vegan diet the next day. So when I hear information that really touches my heart and that really touches my spirit, like, I act on it, So I acted on it immediately, or at least I have the desire. But like I said, when Into the Wild hit, I was just a kid. I didn't know, I had no money. I didn't have no resources. I didn't know what the heck to do. Nobody was willing to, come along with me for the ride. So that was one that I had to skip for the time being. So my brother put me onto that, and I went raw vegan and just started to change the way I ate, and started to look at food. Like, just eating a smoothie was new to me. Imagine that, like, just eating a smoothie was like, I didn't know, like, you could just put bananas and blueberries and drink it, like, And so it just really started to ask myself questions about food and where food comes from and what makes food, and what are the main sources of food. Like, what bread is, what is it? Oh, it's wheat. Oh, and then how they process it, make it to a flour. Just, I didn't ever had thought about that. I just literally never had thought about any of those things. And I started connecting food with my spirituality, and it just took me on this self-development a journey where it became more than food. It turned into community, relationships, healing, trauma, all these things that came along with it. But I think the genesis of that was the introduction to a different way of eating.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, and it, when you think about it, I think you had a post, but I was also reading about this in a book that I've been reading that talks about like how, agriculture, the rise of civilization, the several commodity crops from all around the world that have sort of really like made this global civilization possible. But really talking about how part of what makes us human is our omnivory, our ability to eat basically like anything. Like, we have such a broad diet compared to most animals, or like an animal like a koala, for example, or something. Right. But how much we're missing from our lives as we have simplified and reduced everything down into like, even the fact that, in North America, you can only buy really like one kind of banana, when there's like so many different varieties of plantain in the world. Like, just we've simplified everything down into such a monoculture, and that happens on the micro level through our food systems and what we eat, but it also happens on a macro level, like from a cultural standpoint. Like, this culture is trying to turn humanity into a monoculture too, where we can't have any differences. We have to all be the same in these certain rigid authoritarian kind of ways oftentimes. But I would just love to hear your opinion on some of the ways that I don't know, like the richness of the universe has been reduced down into this really kind of sad monoculture.
Yeah, I think it's hard for people to conceptualize or to understand exactly how far back it goes, because if you ask somebody about food, they would probably think the antithesis to that is farming. And it's like, no, farming was actually a deviation from traditional life ways. Like, and it's not to like knock farming and to say that farming isn't useful, but before farming, it was like, well, it was wild food, and we tended to the wild, but we didn't just like take down the wild to plant something in a monoculture way, the way it's done today. So, even I think that they're recently finding that, when like Europeans came to North America, they saw the abundance, but they thought the abundance was just a byproduct of the land naturally. But it was actually, the people tending to the ecology and making it more fruitful than it might have been without their input, So I like to emphasize that we belong in the ecology, and that our presence in the ecology actually enhances the ecology. Because a lot of people, when they look at themselves, they look at humanity, they see a detriment to nature. They see something that doesn't belong in nature, and they see something that's separate from nature, and something where we're only supposed to visit nature for a short period of time and then go back to civilization. But then that kind of takes away our presence and our importance in the ecology as organisms who have a positive contribution, you know. And I think when we start to look at it from that perspective, we get a whole different relationship with nature and with ourselves, and we don't stop looking at ourselves as like these evil things, you know. But yeah, it's definitely, I think it goes deep. And so when we're talking about civilizations, like, you have to modify food to create civilizations, you know. And I simplify it down, of course, but essentially you have to modify the food supply so you can have a surplus. Once you have a surplus, now you can feed people. And then if you have an excess amount of food, you can have indentured slaves, you know, you could have people that you're feeding to build the civilizations. And then once you have the civilizations, well, you can have these restrictive diets as now but people don't see that progression. They just were born into civilization. We're like, oh, well, I can just go to the store and be vegan. Like, why would I eat meat and have to kill something? Yeah, but the price for civilization was an upfront investment that was paid for in blood. And you just didn't see that part. You know, you just get in the end of it where you are benefiting from it. But there's a lot to it. And it's still producing. This machine is still, you know, producing blood, because it's like life is energy. It's all in exchange. Like, you don't get to have life over there without taking from life over here, because that's just how life is. We exchange energy with one another. Organisms consume one another for their life, you know. And so, yeah, I try to do my best to kind of share that in a way that will allow people to be open and receptive, because, like I said, for some people, going to farming is a step forward, you know, and it is for most people, you know, but it's not, to me, it's like not the end all be all, especially when we're farming in these monoculture styles, you know. I just want people to realize that the deviation happened a long time ago, where we separated from the natural world and manifested all this. And there's different perspectives, because people will be like, well, we're evolving and we're learning, and this is part of it. Technology is a human instinct and trait, and this is just a variation of that. But the distinction that I like to make is that even the tools that we used to have, like, say we created a spear or a bow, that's technology, right? But it's technology within the bounds of the ecology. We still haven't deviated and been insulated from the ecology, because now the technology that we have is completely insulated from the ecology. You don't have a relationship with the ecology, but you still have the technology. So when you have, and I've seen videos of like where traditional people, indigenous people, like in Africa, who are still hunter-gatherers, some guy took like a compound bow, and they were basically comparing his bow to the compound bow, and the chief of the tribe, he basically said, like, he shot it, and he was laughing and he enjoyed shooting it, but he said we would never use that because it would disrupt the balance that we have. It would allow us to take more animals than we're already able to take, and we're already taking enough. So, you know, you see what I'm saying? That balance exists with technology and the ecology still. So to me, it's not the same thing. Like, we can't just say, well, this is just a natural progression of technology. No, because it's not in harmony with the ecology. And as soon as you get out of harmony with the ecology, well, now you deviated from the thing that gives you life. And now that's when we can have the kinds of situations that we're trying to fix and remediate now, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great way of putting it, man. And in this conversation of like appropriate technology, and, you know, this is something we've thought a lot about for our project, which is like the two defining characteristics that people will say that, you know, not separates, but that is unique to humanity, is our ability for technology and our ability to create and pass down culture, right? And, you know, culture is storytelling. And so I've thought a lot about this, like our technologies allow us to tell a story that we're telling ourselves about who we are, and then it's like a feedback loop onto the culture itself, and it perpetuates itself, you know? So certain technologies tell a story of who we believe we are and who we believe is our right to take and how much to not take, and what to do with the earth. So I love that way you phrased it, this kind of like in harmony with the ecology part, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think about, you know, you've recently been reading a book by Daniel Quinn, and it talks about how, like, that outlaws go extinct. Like, if you break the laws of nature and you step outside of, like, the sort of laws of the land that require that things remain in balance, and that, you know, sometimes the gazelle lives and sometimes the gazelle dies, and sometimes the lion gets food and sometimes it doesn't. You know, that sort of, like, balance within an ecology. Like, we are one species who has separated ourselves from it, and it's going to be to our detriment. It's going to be the thing that causes us to go extinct if you know, unless we kind of figure out how to get back to some sort of balance. But I do I do think, oh sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say on that topic, yeah, I think you're right, where humanity is becoming more and more fragile and more dependent. So it's like, even though there's more people and there's more facilitating of life and food and all this abundance, the fragility of the human species and the dependence is super thin. You know, it's like that, you know, we saw that with the pandemic, where all it takes is one thing that could potentially destroy the existence of humanity and make the world for most of humanity, the civilized world, come to an end, you know, which wouldn't be the end of nature and the earth as we know it, but it would be an end of civilization. But so it's like we keep making ourselves more and more vulnerable in the guise of advancing and evolving, supposedly, right? But yeah, so it's like, if people forget their traditional ways that give them sovereignty and allow them to subsist off the land, well, now all their eggs are in the basket of civilization. And in civilization, as we know, they come and go. You know, civilizations, they have their time, they crumble. That's been the pattern so far, at least. You know, there hasn't been one civilization that has persisted, you know, since the beginning of its existence. So we do see the pattern that civilizations fall, and then people return back to the land, and then they build themselves back up. So it's like, to me, I just see it as a cycle, and I think that a lot of people like myself are preparing mentally, physically, and having communities to where this cycle, when it seeds itself and restarts, that we can be ready. You know, we have an understanding of life. You know, when it comes to around death, like, I think civilization is literally the expression of trying to escape death. Like because of the situation that you were talking about, like lions, sometimes they eat, sometimes they don't. Gazelles sometimes get eaten, sometimes they don't. And humans sometimes survive and sometimes they don't, you know. And so I think that uncertainty is what drove people away from the wild and living in harmony with the ecology and entwined with the ecology, to creating something that they felt could provide a level of stability or more certainty, you know, that could give them peace of mind. But what we didn't understand is that there was a trade-off. You know, there was a trade-off for this insulation from the ecology. There was a trade-off in our health, in our relationships, in our communities, and in the way we experience life. Now we're not having the full human experience. Like, we're not. We're having an experience, but it's not the full thing. It's like we're essentially domesticated zoo animals, you know, and, you know, very little of humanity is having that wild experience, being that wild organism that we still have potential for to be, but because of the circumstances that we're born into, we're not expressing that, right? So, yeah, that's how I look at it. Like, there was a trade-off to creating civilization, and I think when we look at it, that there's something to be benefited from embracing this wild, undomesticated version of yourself that you don't even know about. You don't even know what you could feel and experience because you've never experienced it. All you know is domestication. All you know is careers. All you know is grocery stores. But perhaps there is a path that can give you that feeling that you would enjoy, that you would actually benefit and appreciate, and that would complete you in a way that you've never been completed before. So, yeah, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's essentially like the thesis of our film, you know, is that this death denial is what it represents is our attempt at ultimate control over nature, right? We have this illusion that one day our control over the living world will be so complete that we will transcend all limits and the ultimate limit, which is death. But in the wake of this illusion at control, we have created a wasteland of a planet that seems to be completely content with the fact that all things die and all things consume in this fantastic spiral of life and death. And that as scary as that is, because we're a species that can kind of sit here all day and ponder the horror, like the terror of the idea of death, that ultimately the sooner we, like, I love what you're saying, is that the sooner we can accept this reality that's just not going anywhere, the more full and rich our lives become. And I think I'd be curious, like, I think that includes the sadness, that includes the moments of fear and uncertainty that would require in our lives, but therefore adding a richness and a depth to our life. It's almost like, you know, somebody who takes like an antidepressant for depression, right? Like, you're not going to get the highs and lows of your life, but you're going to kind of stay neutral. And I feel like civilization is the antidepressant to life, where it's just kind of neutral, you know, but you don't get the full range of the sadness, of the grief, and of the jubilation that those things can bring you, you know?
Yeah. It's so interesting that you say that. I watched a video, I think yesterday, and it was a simple message, but it really hit me because it was along the lines of what we're talking about. And she was saying that in order to feel something or experience something, you have to be comfortable with its opposite. You know, so that's the reason you go to the gym, you want to experience health, you want to experience feeling strong, you have to go through the pain. You have to you have to be able to tolerate the opposite of the thing that you're wanting to experience. So a lot of people want to experience bliss and paradise, but they're not comfortable with tolerating the opposite of that. And that's life, you know, and the sooner that you can build yourself up in that manner where you can tolerate that, that equips you to be and validates you to be able to experience the opposite of that, you know. But I don't think that you can experience that without going through that. There's a price that you have to pay, you know, to experience bliss and this ecstasy that people are seeking, but they're just not willing to pay that price. And they're trying to elude that. And in the process, they want to create a world where only one end of the spectrum exists, which is fundamentally flawed, because existence is a polarity, and we have both ends of the spectrum that we must embrace and that actually give rise to one another. So when we're talking about death and life, for that matter, like, we know that they feed into one another. You know, we know that death feeds life, and that's how life is allowed to exist, because there's death in the soil, because there's death in the ecology. And so I think that we have to reanalyze our perspective in our view of death to encompass it and include it as part of the life, and from a positive aspect, not from a negative aspect, that death doesn't have to be this negative grim reaper of a thing, you know, that it has its place, you know. And so when we understand that it has its place, we stop demonizing it. And when we stop demonizing, well, now we can embrace it and understand it for what it is, and realize the place that it holds in life, you know?
Yeah, and I love this quote from this author named Francis Weller. He says, like, that grief and gratitude are sisters. So if we think about death in the death of, like, a loved one, you know, what that really means, like, when you're experiencing that grief, it's just, like, the purest expression of love. And, like, I really do think that, you know, in order for us to reach that, like, love and life bliss state that everyone kind of wants to spiritual bypass to get to,
right.
we have to see the horrors. We have to be willing to face reality. And so, you know, oftentimes we're spending a lot of time, like, researching, like, the way that food systems work, the way that colonialism persists to this day, and how it's, you know, oftentimes under this sort of green banner, and how, like, atrocious and ugly that is. But yet at the same time, it's gotten us to this place where we're then being able to have conversations like this, which are so enriching and so much deeper and more full of, you know, the complexity and the nuance that makes life worth living, as compared to this sort of, like, sanitized, sterilized sort of life that I feel like, unfortunately, so many people are living. And I say that from a place of, like, compassion, because I was there too, you know, and I'm still there in so many ways. You know, like, we're in an apartment right now where obviously we have plans to, like, live on the land and, like, live in a yurt and have a very different kind of lifestyle. But right now, you know, we're where we're at with compassion and viewing everyone else with grace who's not quite there yet. But that's a big message that I feel like is very important for me to share in my lifetime, is that in order for us to really have a full human experience of, you know, what is our role on earth, we have to be willing to face those uncomfortable truths. And for me, you know, coming to terms with death in that is what will help me become part of an ecology and to be a steward. And I do think that that's what humanity's role is that we're gardeners, we're stewards. And I don't think that that's grandiose to say. I think that every animal is part of an ecological niche. And we just feel really disconnected from our own niche. And it's not that we're different or special, it's that we're just separated from it right now.
Well, I'd be curious to hear your opinion on this. Do you think humans have a role? When we look at, you know, the Earth from this wide, almost alien perspective, like, if we were to see humans as a species, do you think we have a role? Do you think we have a purpose, you know?
Yeah, I know, because there's people who do believe, like, we have a dominion over animals and our role here is to look after them. But I often look at myself just as an organism in the ecology, as any other organism, you know, not... I realize we have this capacity for language and articulation, and we have brains that give us the capacity to do so much more apparently on the surface than like another organism, but then at the same time, it's kind of our detriment, you know. At the same time, is the thing that's like built this insanity and doesn't allow us to just simplify and just look at it, like ask ourselves why. Like, that's the thing. Civilization is built, and we've done it, but then it's like, but why? You know, why did we do that? What was the purpose behind this? You know, because a lot of people, they do like look at ancient cultures who build pyramids and stuff like that as like grandiose. And I had made a video about this that, triggers some people, because a lot of the culture online especially does revere the people who build pyramids and these structures. But then to me, it's like, well, that's still civilization. Like, why did they build those pyramids? You know, what's the purpose behind it? Like, if you have everything that you need in the ecology, if you have everything that you requires for your life, why build any civilization? Why put any time of work? Because to me, it's like it represents the enslavement of humanity. You know, it represents the domestication of humanity, maybe at a different time period, but it still was part of that machine, that process that led to us being in our fully domesticated forms today. So I just have a different perspective, and you know, I'm open to other ideas. You know, people say these pyramids were devices and they were used to clean the water, but then I ask, well, why was the water tainted? You know, so it's just like things like that. You know, I like to always ask why and just kind of take it back, because it's so much that we think we need, and I think that that's what drives a lot of the production of civilization and its advancement is this idea that we need more things, when it's just so simple. Like, it's very simple. Like, it's not a lot. You know, we can have fun in the ways that we express it, but just to understand and know that what we need and require is fundamentally existent in the ecology. And, you know, that this thing that we've created has just been something that has, yes, it's comfortable. Yes, it's nice to have sometimes, and we enjoy it, but we have to also recognize the cost. You know, what did it take to produce this, and what are the repercussions on a short-term basis, on a long-term basis? What is it doing to the humanity, you know? And if you're okay with that, we'll proceed forward. But if we don't share what the costs are, we pretend there are no costs, there are no repercussions, that's when I think we are allowed to facilitate it in a way that's truly destructive, you know, because now we're not, you know, taking account for what it is that is also producing in terms of, you know, negative side effects.
I think that the idea of like man being a steward can be taken in that perverted way, and it can be taken in a higher expression as well. But yeah, like obviously we can look around us and see how the dominion and the control has been very pervasive over the past 10,000 years, and it's just funny to me, you know, thinking about how it's like we really don't like know why we did this. Like we're just born here, and then looking back and trying to make sense of it. And you know, one of the things I just wanted to say, you know, is like what we do know is that most people were forced into this way of life. Like, you know, most people had to be colonized, genocided into this. And then, of course, you know, it wasn't until civilization began and agriculture became widespread, agriculture in the way that we're talking about, like, right? Like, not like a permaculture or sort of like some sort of a polyculture sort of situation, but this annual grains in monocultures kind of agriculture, like, that's when famines began. You know, that's when people started dying of starvation. That didn't happen before as often as it has since the dawn of civilization.
That's right.
I guess.
Yeah. Could I say something on that real quick?
Yeah.
Because this is something else that I've talked about where, you know, a big point of the argument behind growing food and like genetically engineering crops is to feed populations. But the way I look at it is like, no, populations grew as a result of us modifying the food supply. So they have it backwards. They think that the more they modify the food supply, that the more they're going to feed the world, when in fact, the more they modify the food supply, the more the population grows, because that's an artificial population. Like in wildlife management, they have carrying capacity for animals, right? Which is they have a certain number that they have to be at and they allow people to hunt that animal based off of those numbers in that regulation. But for humans, is the same thing, right? Within an ecology, there's a carrying capacity for humans because the ecology can only produce a certain amount at a certain time during a certain cycle, right? So you're not going to get concentrated amount of people being born because of a surplus of food. So like we said, in order to create civilization and inflate the population artificially, you have to modify the food supply. So I look at it more as a consequence of modifying the food supply rather than a solution to the population issue. So I don't know how we're gonna reduce the population if that's even an issue. You know, that's what they're saying. But by modifying the food supply, we know that a lot of it is efficiency. That a lot of things go to waste. Like even in our individual households, like food is not as efficient as it could be. You know, and a lot of it has to do with our ease of access. Like we could get it any time of the day. So if we throw, half of the food and we're not feeling hungry, it's nothing to us, So our efficiency is way reduced, but there's a lot of resource displacement and management that is also the issue. But I just wanted to point that out. Yeah, that the way I look at it, modifying the food supply inflates the population, not the other way around.
Well, I think you're spot on, and this is the dirty secret, because we've talked in making this film, we've traveled all over the country talking to farmers, and especially conventional farmers. They go to these big conventions, right, and they're told every day, you're feeding the world, you're feeding the world, you're feeding the world. But the dirty secret is since the 80s or 90s, we've had a surplus of food in the world. So the starving populations is not because we don't have enough food, it's because they don't have money. It's an economics thing.
Oh, yeah, right.
They have to pay for food, right? And so we've had plenty of food, and so what it is just a conglomeration of wealth and power to convince farmers to make more and more and more food. And I like you pointing this out. And this is the hard thing with population, right? Like, it's such a touchy subject with people, but people can't think like, we're no different than any other species on Earth. If there's a surplus of food, the population is going to grow to meet the capacity of that food, and that if we keep making more food, we're going to exacerbate the problem. And the hard answer is less food, less people. And I don't know the answer, and I'm not going to be the one to implement this.
I get what you're saying, and so it's like it's also possible to understand something and not be an advocate for it, right? So I can understand that that reducing the food would effectively, incentivize the reduction of the population. That's just how it works. I'm not saying that that's what we're pushing or incentivizing, because I think we're at a point where there is no way out of a consequence-free way out of this reality, unfortunately, because that's how life works, and we have to atone for the sins against nature. Like, really, that's really the simplest way that I can put it. And so we have to be aware of that, but also be willing to talk about it, because it's not like we're advocates for it, because we aren't responsible for it. We were just born into this. Like, we're just barely a blip in the timeline of humanity, but we're aware of it, and for us to not share the information or silence it, it would be a detriment, and so when we talk about these things, it's not that we have an agenda. Like, that is one of the topics that's more that I've gotten pushback from where it comes to population or this idea of overpopulation, because people do conflate that with me trying to push for some agenda that the elites have planned to depopulate the world. It's not that at all. It's just looking at it from an ecology-based perspective. Like, the land produces a certain amount of food that regulates the population. If you manipulate that and create a surplus that's artificial, then the population will grow, but that will be an artificial growth. It won't be an organic growth based on the ecology. So it's just it's that simple.
Yeah, we heard it described as a ghost carrying capacity or a phantom carrying capacity. Like, it's an illusion, right? And this is what we've been thinking a lot the past few weeks, especially with this whole UK and Russia thing, is that, like, people don't understand, the moment that fossil fuel prices go up or the access to fossil fuels gets restricted, like, all of our food is dependent, from the fertilization of the soil to growing, processing, and getting it to you, is dependent on fossil fuels. So this idea that we can feed 10 billion people is built off of the premise that there's going to be plenty of fossil fuel forever, right? And it's like, and it's also, gets really squirrely.
Well, yeah, and then the population as it is right now is so fundamentally based around this globalized food system, and it's like, I think our perspective would be like, okay, like, this globalized food system, like, one, isn't even feeding everyone. It's not working. It's not providing people with the access to nutrients that they need. But also, like, it's also separating us from life that gives us meaning. But it's like, so, the antidote to so many of the problems that we see is it's like localizing your food system, like, as much as humanly possible, like, know where your food comes from. And, for me, it's like, I also want to be the one killing the animal too. Like, I want to go that extra step. But for some people, it might just be enough to just be like, your farmer, where you're getting your food. You're not being reliant on NPK from Russia to grow your wheat so that you can, and that's where the food sovereignty bit comes in. And so I wanted to ask you, how, because I think we're in agreement that, like, there's no easy way out of the global situation that we're in. Like, everything is pretty severely fucked from, like, every angle.
Yeah.
But if there is a way forward, like, how do you see humanity, like, coming back into balance in a large enough scale that it makes a difference?
Yeah, well, that's a big question, and it's something that I think about, and I'm also careful of how I share it because it can be misconstrued in many ways. But I don't know if there's a way that all of humanity and the way people would like to fantasize about that gets out of this situation. I just think that there's going to be a portion of people who choose to go a different route and choose to empower themselves and take that responsibility back for themselves, and others who are simply believing in the civilized world that they've been born into, and that are going to go along with that to the end, and that are never going to have an interest in reconnecting, like you were saying, with their local ecologies and figuring out what's really real. Because when you get to the local level, now you can really see what is actually real, what you can actually tangibly do with the food that's available in your environment. Otherwise, like, when we're talking about globalized food systems, it's like a conglomeration of the whole world, so you can just pick and choose all these things, but it's not realistic because it's depending on the system that is immense and that is way out of your control. Like, you can't control all these systems and the trading that's happening. That's you're just seeing the end result. So when we go local, it's like, oh, okay, so you guys don't have them anymore because the season's over. That's how it works. Like, it's not like the grocery store where you can just keep buying apples year round because they're always available. It's like there's seasons, and there's certain things that grow in your ecology. So I just think when we're talking about humanity and how we move forward from this is as simple as this. Like, a lot of people will grieve over a gazelle getting eaten by a lion, but just because the gazelle gets eaten by the lion doesn't mean that the gazelle species goes extinct. You know what I mean? And the gazelle species still persists, and in fact, the predation of that lion enhances the group. And so that's kind of how I look at this. Like, for humanity to persist, not all of humanity has to persist, but there has to be enough of humanity who's equipped enough and who's taken on that responsibility and that sovereignty for the human species to persist. So that's what I more so try to focus on, is equipping myself and sharing the information that can equip others, those who choose to take on the path, those who choose to take that responsibility and that sovereignty back for themselves, because I can't force anybody into this. All I can do is share, my perspective, and to share the information and wisdom that I learned along the way. And so that's how I look at it. Those who choose to take it on, that's who will be receding humanity, because when civilizations end, the natural world persists. And if we're in tune with the natural world and in alignment with it, well, then so will we. But if we're in alignment with civilization, well, we will only be taken as far as civilization exists.
That's great. Yeah. We won't keep you for too much longer, man, but I think what you just said, it kind of leads me to this question is, we think a lot like on how to go forward, and I think a big part of how to move forward is kind of like this Renaissance thinking, where there's things about the present, right, that are great that we now know and have a felt experience of, but also for 300,000 plus years, our ancestors figured out how to live pretty damn well, right? And so there's a lot to learn from them. And so my question is, what does indigeneity mean to you, and what can be learned from indigenous wisdom, and what value do you find from that?
I really appreciate that question, because I think that's super important. This is a big topic of conversation, and I just want to share my perspective. I don't have any affiliation with any particular indigenous tribe or group. I'm just merely reconnecting with myself, on an individual level, so I speak only for myself. But the way I view indigeneity and being indigenous to the earth is having a relationship to the earth that's tangible and reciprocal, and that you're actually out on the ecology. Because to me, we all have that potential, so I don't look at the color of your skin or the culture that you came from. My call and my invitation is to anybody who resonates and wants to reconnect themselves back to the ecology, back to the nature of themselves, and to invite them to restore that indigeneity within themselves, regardless of where they come from, because the earth doesn't know your history in that way. It doesn't know the blood that's in you or the blood lineage. That's irrelevant. I think the earth can feel your connection to it, and it can feel how you interact with it, and that's what truly matters. So that's why it's so important to me that we share this message with everybody, and that we don't exclude anybody who wants to participate, because that's what we need as humanity. We need to find something that unifies us and that we can all find common ground in. And to me, that is this whole concept of what we're talking about, reconnecting to nature, the ecology, and the nature of ourselves and our internal ecology, which is all, fractal versions of each other. It's all interrelated and interwoven. So when I look at that, indigenous and indigeneity, that's what I think about. I think about that we all have the capacity for it, no matter of our background. It's something that we can awaken within us, and it's about how we relate to the land. And literally, if you look at the definition, it's like being indigenous to somewhere. Like, we're all born on Earth. The problem is that a lot of us were born on top of like civilization. We were born because if civilization is insulated from nature, so it's like we were born on Earth, but not really. We were born like on top of this insulated part of the Earth. So I think that's why we're not considered indigenous, because our relationship to the land has been severed. But when you have a relationship to the land, like, okay, yeah, you were born in LA, but what does the ecology under LA look like? Like, what animals roamed there before this concrete was laid down? That's why, you don't see yourself as indigenous, because you weren't born into the natural ecology there. You were born on top of the city that was built on top of there. So once we connect with nature, the real world, that's when we restore that part of ourselves and become indigenous once again.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's
beautiful, man. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that. And I think it's also this sort of situation we're in is like all hands on deck. Like, we all need to feel like we belong here. We all need to feel like we belong to Mother Earth, and our ability to actually be a part of the ecology, it is so necessary. And if we feel like we can't get there because of some sort of a birthright, I think that the problem is just going to continue. And, you know, like, I think that there's a deep wounding and a deep sadness that so many people feel because they don't feel like they're indigenous to the place that they live, and they don't feel a sense of belonging or like oneness with their environment. And, you know, I hope that everyone can feel like that they do belong here, that we do belong on Earth. We're here for a reason, every single one of us.
And I also, I think there was a time where we could have looked at the way somebody looked and understood the culture, where they were coming from, and had a pretty good idea of what they were about. But I think that in today's world, we've just cross-pollinated so many ideas and cultures that you can have a European descended person who's interested in connecting back to the land more so than like maybe an indigenous, somebody who is of indigenous descent, who's wanting to more so incorporate with the civilized world, which I see no fault in, because we're all curious and we're all sovereign to be able to choose our own path. But that's what I'm saying. We have to explore deeper than the surface to find out what's people's intention and where their path is taking them, to see if that's somebody who resonates with us in the path that we're going.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Well, unless you got any big questions, we usually... wait.
I wanted to ask, you had mentioned before we started recording about your course, the 5 Food Kingdoms, and I just, if you want to plug that, feel free.
So right now, I'm building out this course about the 5 Food Kingdoms, which is essentially a course to connect people with their food in a way that structures it, that makes them feel like it's not a diet, but it's a way of that traditional indigenous people have utilized the different kingdoms of food for sustenance. So that's going to include the bacterial kingdom, which is things like foods like spirulina, chlorella, fermented foods, and then the plant kingdom, which includes all parts of the plant with like roots and the tubers, the stems, the flower, the fruit, of course. And then the fungal kingdom, which includes foods like medicinal mushrooms, culinary mushrooms, truffles, things of that nature. Animal kingdom, of course, which includes land, terrestrial animals, but also aquatic life. And then the elemental kingdom, which includes the 4 elements, which is like embracing the sun, getting that good water, breathing that good air, and also the earth element, which is like the minerals, the salts, the clays, the shilajits, the mineral compounds, things of that nature. So it's just putting all that is food, and also answering what is food, because there's confusion around that. To me, food is anything that an organism could use to sustain itself, and so it's not like we didn't get too much into this, but like I had seen a post where it said like a zebra's ass is not more food, like it's not any more food for a lion than like a milk is for like a human. Basically, like the food is not dependent on the organism's willingness to give it to you, but your ability to utilize it for energy. Basically, so we see that humans have been, like we said, omnivorous throughout human history, throughout all cultures. Like we've tapped into all different kingdoms of life, which has allowed us to be so prolific. And so I want to give people, empower them with the knowledge of what exists out there in their ecology for food, and how they can look at it and not demonize any food group, not demonize any kingdom of life, but understand its place in totality, so that they can be empowered with that wisdom to utilize it and, go on this road to sovereignty.
Wow, that's a cool course, man. That's really cool. Before we ask you our final question, where can people find you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, it's all Wild Quetzal. And my website's not up yet, but I'm working on it. That'll be wildquetzal.com as well. And so, mostly active on Instagram the most. That's where I like to connect with people. If people want to DM me or connect in that way, reach me, that would be a good place.
Perfect, man. Yeah, we'll link to everything as well.
Yeah. We'll definitely link everything. And, we couldn't recommend your page more. It's so good. It's so full of really, really awesome information.
To anybody listening, your ability to, get... the power of symbols can be really powerful, and you're really good at getting an image to say a lot, and I think that's the power of art. So
I'm grateful.
Keep it up, man. I love it. I might have to copy you one day, or hire you to do animations for our movie or something, because it's so sick.
Totally.
Yeah, man. So our last question is, what do you want to happen to your body when you die?
I think I would just like to have it reintegrate back into the ecology and just allow, nature to reclaim it, the ecology to reclaim it, I think a lot of the practices that we have are insulate our bodies from that process, and so I always talk about nature as exposure and civilization is insulation. So, wanting to expose myself to nature and let it interact with me in the way that it wants to, that's ideally, but I'm not going to be here to have control of that. So, but if you see my body and it's out and I'm dead, just know that was my intention.
Absolutely. Cool.
Yeah,
Thank you, man.
Love it.
Can I share something really quick?
Oh, yeah,
absolutely.
please do.
Okay, I just wanted to share the story that's talking about death and what we're talking about. So as you see my necklace, so I was out in at the store and somebody at the grocery store said, "Oh, I like your necklace." And upon looking at it further, they're like, "Wait a minute, are those teeth?" And I was like, "Yeah, they're boar tusk." And the person was like, "Oh, never mind." So they kind of took back the compliment, right? But it just really made me think about how we can look at something and only see one part of it because we're blinded to the totality of it. Because if she would have took a look, she would have saw that there's a seed that represents life. And these are also seeds, and they also represent life. So this necklace isn't just an ode to death, it's an ode to life as well, and birthing new life and that whole cycle, so we must see all of it and embrace all of it and know that there's a place and a purpose for all of it.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well said, man. Well said. Thank you so much.
I want to make sure, can you still hear us? It looks like we're frozen.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
That's good.
I wanted you to know that we're still here, but
Thank you for that start. Here, I'm going to just stop recording for one moment.